Good afternoon, everyone. Patrick Malirec, Secretary General of PIARC. Welcome to our second discussion session on the COVID-19 crisis. Let me invite you to check that your microphones and cameras are turned off. Please, everyone. If you want to raise an issue or ask a question, there is a question and answer session at the end of the session in about an hour from now. You can prepare that and share your questions or share a practice through the chat feature of the software. You can find that at the bottom right of the main window. You send a message to all participants, and our colleague Christos Xenophontas, who is chair of one of our PIARC committees, will monitor this and will raise the questions when the time comes to relevant panelists. Please note that this session is being recorded. This includes the questions and answers that will be presented and discussed an hour from now. And the resulting video will be shared on PIARC's website. A key disclaimer. We all know this is a crisis. Time is very important. It's very likely that knowledge and practice that we share today has not been officially approved by the country's official authorities. This is why I want to stress that the ideas and examples shared here are for illustration only. We have, of course, taken care in the preparation of the material, but we cannot accept responsibility for any damage that may be caused. So, what are we focusing on? The short term. The world's going through a crisis and every day counts. What we're trying to do at PIARC, and we do that very regularly, is to share knowledge and current practice between PIARC members. We need to do this urgently in order to support responses to the pandemic. Please, everyone, turn off your microphone. Thank you. However, inspiration can be found anywhere. A good idea now could save lives, improve business resilience, and could also minimize disruption of services. Ideas can be found anywhere, in any country across the globe, and this is why we want to establish those connections. In parallel, at PIARC, we are planning medium and long-term actions when the pandemic is manageable, such as identifying the real best practice and sharing them in new reports and other webinars. The agenda of our session today will be first a brief introduction to PIARC, then what are the issues that we have identified as being faced by road operators and administrations. Then we will have 4 country presentations on the current situation. In the U.S.A, in the Gulf area, in China, and then one of the 4 presentations will be the recommendations from existing PIARC reports on network operations. I'm very thankful to the 4 speakers who have made themselves available today. Then we will have about half an hour for a question and answer session. Our speakers today are myself, Secretary General of PIARC, then Tymon, Executive Director of AASHTO in the U.S.A, Jonathan Spear, based in Dubai, who is on our Committee on Performance of Transport Administrations, Valentina Galasso, Chair of our Committee on Road Network Operations and ITS, as well as Dr. Jian Wang from the China Academy of Transportation Sciences. And the organizers of the session will be presented when we are nearing the end of the session. So, introduction, very short. What is PIARC? So PIARC is the new name of the World Road Association. We were founded 110 years ago, actually, as a non-profit, non-political association. Our goal is to increase and organize exchange of knowledge on all matters related to roads and road transport. There can be road safety, there can be adaptation to climate change, there could be pavements, bridges, fencing of road infrastructure, you name it. We have 4 key missions that have been agreed by our members: to be a leading international forum for analysis and discussion of all topics related to roads and road transport, to identify, develop, and disseminate best practice, and to give better access to international information, to focus as much as we can on the needs of developing countries and countries in transition. This means that our members, some of them from high-income economies, others from lower-income economies, are all welcome, and we try to address all of their needs. And the fourth mission is to design, promote tools for decision-making, such as HDM4, you may have heard of it, which is a software that helps road administrations and development banks make decisions as regards investments. The way we work is to mobilize the expertise of our members through operations that are guided by a 4-year strategic plan, and a new one has just started. So what are the issues faced by road operators and administrations? Well, issue number one is to ensure that your employees' health and safety are guaranteed. This is true of everyone, but in particular for customer-facing frontline staff who work with customers, toll booth operators, for example. Also for staff working in the offices and staff working in other facilities or on the road itself. Issue number two, well, obviously you need to maintain activity and business continuity with limited human resources, because some of your staff may be working from home. Also, you need to support employees who might be at higher risk, people with chronic health situations, for example. Also, when a proportion of the workforce are forced to self-isolate or are sick, and you need to take into account indirect impacts, such as school closures, which will keep your staff busy at home with their children, staff availability, and staff morale. If I continue on this line, you need to prioritize between essential and non-essential activities. You need to discuss opportunities for maintenance during a period of low demand, and you need to identify the best technology, such as teleconferencing, for example, with related security issues maybe. And it's vital to maintain links between ministries, road administrations, operators, and supply chain partners. Issue number three is the impact on transportation. Well, many countries are facing a major decrease, both within their borders and with neighboring countries. We're talking about roads. You need to maintain critical links and flow of goods while regulating movement of people. That's a challenge. You also need to address cancellations or reductions in public transport, which may or may not be part of your portfolio, but it frequently is. You need to find ways to give advice against making non-essential journeys. You can use variable message boards, for example. And you need to address or even embrace, in some cases, the economic, social, and environmental impacts, such as the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions or reductions in pollutions, as well as, well, this is not that positive for our members, reduction in revenues from gasoline taxes and fares. We also need to check whether there are the limitations on the maximum number of people in vehicles are enforced. Sometimes road operators need to enforce that themselves. And you need to provide appropriate services to freight transporters and to buses. And we know that in many countries, that is a challenge. Issue number four is how you maintain business relations with all your supply chain partners, contractors, and SMEs, including checking maybe that they have their own business continuity plans in action. In some cases, you want to support businesses, especially urban or essential ones. You may need to exercise contractual provisions, for example, case of force majeure. So what is in your contracts in such cases, in particular for major contracts such as concession contracts, and you will need to deal with added costs and delays. Issue number five is, well, relations with your customers and stakeholders. You need to share information on a way that's timely and accurate, taking into account the user perspective. You need to work with a large number of public agencies, and you will have complex relations to manage. Civil authorities will issue directives, sometimes more than one per day. At the same time, you need to ensure technical planning and delivery of services. That's a balancing act. You need to manage relations with the media, and communication is absolutely key. Issue number five is security. We see an increase in cyber attacks in some countries. There's also a change in roles of frontline operational staff. You need to make sure that they are qualified. You need to maintain security when there are increasing number of employees who are teleworking, working from home. And as usual, but now it's a crisis, so it's happening, you need to maintain relationships with emergency services, the army, civil defense, etc. So this was a brief outline of the issues we have identified that our members are facing and that the world community as a whole is facing. Our next speaker is going to be Tymon from the USA. He will present the USA's perspective on the current situation. So, Jim, let me give you the floor and just ask me when you want to move to the next slide. Jim, your turn.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for having me participate here in this presentation. I'm going to speak a little bit about COVID-19's impact on transportation in the United States of America. So, if we can, Patrick, move on to the next slide. So as Patrick said, my name is Tymon. I'm the Executive Director of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, also known as AASHTO. And AASHTO serves as the PIARC National Committee of the United States of America. And in my capacity as Executive Director, I serve as the Chairman of the National Committee. So moving on to that next slide. So what is AASHTO? It's actually very similar to PIARC. We are a nonprofit association that was founded just over 100 years ago. And our members include the departments of transportation of all 50 states from around the country, as well as the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. We do have associate members from different federal, state, and local public agencies, as well as a handful of associate members from other countries. But our voting members, the members that make up our board of directors, are only from the 50 states, departments of transportation across the country. And again, as I said earlier, we serve as PIARC's National Committee for the United States of America. So a little bit about where we are in the United States of America regarding COVID-19. As of last night, there are roughly 190,000 cases of COVID-19 that have been diagnosed and just over 3,000 deaths. There have been deaths reported in every state in the country with the exception of Hawaii and Wyoming. And we're projecting that there's going to be between 100 and 200,000 deaths once we're through the end of this, hopefully sometime this summer. As a result, there have been emergency declarations that have been made all across the country. On March 13th, President Trump declared a nationwide state of emergency related to COVID-19. But even before that, governors of several of their states that were hit early on had declared their own states of emergency. On February 29th, Washington State Governor Jay Inslee became the first governor to declare a state of emergency over COVID-19. But as of this morning, every state in the country has declared a state of emergency related to COVID-19. These emergency declarations allow states to access different pots of federal money from the federal government and give them additional flexibilities and powers in how they address issues within their state. So on the next slide, Patrick, I want to talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has been impacting state departments of transportation around the country. In case you're not aware, the states and localities in the United States of America are the ones that own, operate, and maintain about 90% of the road and bridge infrastructure in the United States. The federal government actually has very little ownership of any of the surface transportation infrastructure in the United States. Most of that is done at the state and local level. The federal government provides funding and a little bit of regulation, but for the most part, it is up to the states and localities to be able to build, operate, and maintain their surface transportation networks. So in these instances, when you have a situation like this, it is really the state departments of transportation that come to the forefront and are able to maintain or operate their systems in the ways that they see are appropriate. In many states, it's important to know that state DOTs are usually one of the largest agencies within state government. And as a result, they are often put into action early and serve on the front line when we have some type of a disaster like this. When it's a natural disaster, such as an earthquake or a hurricane or tornadoes, they're often put into service to help with debris removal, to make sure that we have access to all the communities that are impacted by natural disasters. And what we're seeing in this instance is that state departments of transportation are also serving on the front lines for the response to COVID-19 as well. In some states, they're being used to help to set up and manage drive-through testing facilities. You're seeing that in New York State, where the New York State Department of Transportation is helped to set up several of the drive-through testing facilities, and they're helping to manage those facilities as well in New York. And even in the state of Florida, they've set up checkpoints at the entrance to the state, and the State Department of Transportation there is helping to manage the traffic flow and the facilities that are being used to check the groups and the vehicles that are coming into the state from other states, to inform them of some of the quarantine procedures that the governor has put in place in the state of Florida. When it comes to construction and maintenance, we've seen that most state DOTs are continuing to keep the construction schedule that they've had before the COVID-19 virus really started to impact the United States. There are a couple of states that have pulled back on construction and their construction schedule. Specifically in Washington State, last week they'd made a decision that they are going to halt their construction program. You've seen in the state of New York as well, pull back on their construction projects. And Pennsylvania, a few weeks ago, said that they were going to halt their road construction projects. But just as of yesterday, they've started to bring some of those projects back online. From a maintenance standpoint, obviously, it's a responsibility of the state departments of transportation to make sure that the road network is still up and running to be able to provide essential transportation services. So those general maintenance services to make sure that the system can still operate as it should are still being taken on in every state across the country. From a freight mobility standpoint, again, our highway network and our road network here in the United States is integral to make sure that we're able to provide emergency equipment and supplies to all parts of the country, especially as it relates to COVID-19. But also, it's important to remember that when it comes to essential goods such as food and groceries, we need to make sure that we're able to keep the system up and running so that the grocery stores can continue to get their deliveries as well, so that we can continue to put food on the shelves. One of the areas that states are really struggling with here are the weight limits that are in place on our interstate highway system. And we've been working with the federal government and across state lines to make some adjustments to the weight limits so that trucks are able to carry slightly heavier loads to be a little bit more efficient in getting those goods to market, so that we don't have as many empty shelves in grocery stores, and that we're able to more efficiently deliver some of the supplies, specifically emergency supplies and equipment related to COVID-19. From an operations standpoint, most of the state DOTs across the country have instructed their workers who have office jobs that they should be working from home to the greatest extent possible. Most government buildings in the United States have been shut down and the employees have been asked to work from home. But as many of you know, the maintenance workers that are out there and are in charge of making sure that your facilities are operating and being maintained don't have the luxury of being able to do that from home. You're not able to clear a storm drain from home. You've got to actually be out there on the road. So there's still a significant portion of the state DOT workforce that is still out there in the field and reporting to work on a daily basis. In one of Patrick's earlier slides, he spoke of the toll collectors as well. One of the things that we've seen here in the U.S. Is nearly every toll agency in the country has moved to some form of electronic tolling. Most of them had already had the option for electronic tolling, toll collection, but there was always an option to pay as well as you came through toll booths. But now most of those facilities, in response to COVID-19, have gone to all electric toll collections. We also wanted to mention that we're seeing a big reduction in the amount of vehicle traffic out there on the road over the last 3 weeks, up to a 50% reduction in traffic volumes in some areas. And as a result, since most of the transportation-related revenue that is collected to fund the operation and maintenance of our network here in the United States is done through a tax on gasoline, that reduction in driving is also resulting in a reduction in revenue that is being collected to help support those activities. We're not seeing that impact immediately, but we know that we're gonna see the impact of this reduction in driving in the future, and that will impact our revenue streams to fund future transportation projects. So moving on to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening at the federal level for COVID-19. Early on in this process, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security designated infrastructure workers as essential during this COVID-19 emergency. And what that meant was they classified different series of workers as essential and essentially gives them the opportunity to continue to work, even as many states across the country have adopted stay-at-home orders, which require the residents to not leave their homes other than to go out for essential activities like going to seek for doctor's appointments or going to shop for groceries. So construction and other infrastructure workers are permitted to leave their home to go to their jobs as they've been designated by the Department of Homeland Security as essential. It's also important to note that the U.S. Congress has passed 3 COVID-19 related bills in March. The third bill that was passed just last week and signed by the president last Friday does include some money for transportation. And Christos, if you can move to the next slide there, wanted to show a little bit about what was funded in that bill. There was $25 billion for public transportation, for transit systems in that bill. There's about $1 billion for intercity passenger rail, our Amtrak system. There's about $10 billion for airports, and about $70 billion in grants and loans for the private sector aviation businesses. It's important to note that these amounts of money that were included in this bill really were for emergency operational support. They identified parts of the transportation sector that needed an infusion of dollars just to be able to keep their doors open. So for public transportation agencies, they saw 90% reductions in ridership. In addition to that, they saw additional expenses that they had to take on in order to clean and sanitize their vehicles and their stations. And without this infusion in federal dollars, those transit agencies did not think that they were going to be able to continue to operate. And in a lot of areas, those public transportation systems are essential in being able to move people, even as we are under these stay-at-home orders in many states across the country. Congress is considering a fourth COVID-19 related bill. They are not coming back to Washington, D.C. to do any legislation until likely the end of April, beginning of March. But there is thought that when they come back and take on a fourth piece of legislation, there may be more funding from the federal government to invest in infrastructure construction projects as a way to stimulate the economy. But we won't know a lot of details about that until end of April, beginning of May. And at that point, we'll just have to see what Congress decides to come up with. Patrick, I think that's the last slide that I had. And again, happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you for that in-depth presentation. So as Jim said, questions are welcome. If you have a question, please ask it through the chat feature, Conversation in French, and Christos will be monitoring those for our Q&A session in about half an hour. So we move on to our second speaker. Jonathan is based in Dubai, and he will share with us the private sector's perspective on the Gulf area. So let me just unmute our friend Jonathan. And Jonathan, you're good to go.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me. So next slide, Patrick. I'm going to present over the next few minutes something a little bit different than some of the presentations we've heard last week, and indeed the presentation from AASHTO that we've just heard. Firstly, in the sense it's from the Middle East, from the United Arab Emirates, where I'm currently based. And I'm also going to be taking a private sector perspective. The majority of PIARC members, as you know, are public road and transport administrations, but there are a number of private members, and of course there is the issue of the supply chain and private companies that are active in the sector. So that's really going to be my focus this afternoon. Next slide. Just to very briefly, a little bit about me. I work for a company called Atkins Acuity. We're a global company. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And I'm currently based in the United Arab Emirates, specifically in Dubai. And I'm a director with Atkins at the moment. I've had a number of roles in PIARC, currently working with Christos Xenophontos on TC 1.1, covering specifically the role of transport agencies in shaping disruptive technologies. And in fact, we had a question on how the current COVID-19 crisis would influence the future of autonomous vehicles last week. And we're already thinking ahead on how some of this will influence our work program moving forward. Next slide. So very briefly, I'm going to have some introductory comments, some overview of COVID-19 as it currently is happening in the U.A.E, the United Arab Emirates, and the GCC. The GCC stands for the Gulf Consultative Council, which is a grouping of 6 Gulf countries in the region. I'll talk a little bit about that. I will talk about some impacts and responses on the road and transport network here in the UAE and in Dubai. And then I'll focus a little bit on the effects on our company and the early efforts that we're taking to manage and mitigate those impacts in the immediate term and moving forward. The image that you can see on the right is in fact the tallest building in the world. It's called the Burj Khalifa, and it's here in Dubai. And as you can see, they used it, this is actually a picture from last week. They used it as probably the world's largest billboard to actually put out the message that we are in a lockdown and we are currently encouraged to stay at home as much as possible. So they put that on the side of the building to really let everyone know what was going on. Next slide. So some introductory comments. As we know, and as Patrick has already said, the current COVID-19 crisis is a global event. But it's important to, from our perspective as well, it's not just a public health emergency, but it is an economic crash as well. And at least as severe as the 2008 financial crisis. In fact, stock markets seem to have fallen to the lowest level since 1987. So we, from a private perspective, are focused as much on the economic impacts in the short to medium term as the immediate public health issues. Clearly, that crisis presents immediate logistical and operational challenges for us. But looking forward, also it presents some positive opportunities, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. And there are a number of considerations which I will mention shortly that are certainly worthy of further discussion moving forward, particularly as we recover from COVID-19, and whether that's a question of weeks or whether it takes longer, at least extremely uncertain at the moment. We are unlikely to go back to the way that we were. We're unlikely to go back to what some people have said of normal. There will be medium and long-term implications. And indeed, we need to start thinking about those now. And my role within my company is in transport planning and transport strategy. And we are actually starting to think about what the impact on the transport market and the transport sector is going to be, and how we will in fact respond to some of those. Finally, as I say, my perspective is that of a private company. There are some similarities and there are some differences to the perspective of a public road or transport agency. Just to sum up the current COVID-19 situation in the UAE and the Gulf Consultative Council area, it's 6 countries: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman. And you can see in the graphic here the populations of these countries, but the current number of cases and the current of deaths from COVID-19. And what you can see, there's a number of interesting points here. But the perspective from here is the number of COVID-19 cases in the region at 4,000 across all 6 countries, and the number of deaths, 22 as of yesterday, of course, is relatively low compared to what we've seen in China, what we are currently seeing in Europe, and what we are about to see what we are already seeing and about to see more in North America. That doesn't mean, however, that the governments here have not responded. They actually have responded extremely strongly in terms of locking things down. So basically, most public facilities are closed, all tourist attractions have been closed, parks, beaches. People are being encouraged to work from home and stay at home as much as possible, and to travel only for essential business, shopping for food and pharmaceuticals, and so on. So you see actually a picture, even though relatively low numbers of cases and certainly deaths, fortunately, we are seeing pretty much the effects of public lockdown that are evident in Europe and parts of the US. The other thing to bear in mind for the GCC, and in fact the United Arab Emirates, is, and this is why I put it in here, is most of the populations of these countries are in fact expatriate. So the local citizens, particularly in Qatar and the UAE, are around 10 to 15% of the population. As much as 85% are expat, and actually that means we rely on international aviation and planes to basically travel to and from our home countries and to actually do business in the region. As well as the full or the partial lockdowns in daily life, that is one of the key things which has been hit here. There's been an almost near cessation of international flights. Emirates, one of the biggest airlines in the world, effectively grounded everything about a week ago for at least 2 months. And in fact, the only airline doing any substantial flying in the region actually is Qatar Airways, but they will probably shut down next week, we believe. The other thing about the impact in the GCC is that the immediate economic impacts are exacerbated by record low oil prices. So whereas most governments have been planning their budgets at the level of $60 to $70 a barrel for oil, and oil is the main source of income for most of these countries. As you know, it's currently trading at about $23 a barrel, down over 50% since January. So as well as the direct economic impact of COVID-19, we have the economic impact of a record low oil price. So we have what effectively a perfect storm. Moving forward, we think recovery in the second half of this year is possible, but there's a number of factors in place and extremely uncertain as to the precise timing, form, and the precise form of the recovery moving forward. Next slide. So the impacts of the road and the transport network here, and I'm going to focus on the UAE and particularly on Dubai, which is the biggest city and the economic centre of the UAE relative to Abu Dhabi, which is more of an administrative city within the country. Well, we've certainly seen substantial falls in demand for mobility within cities and between cities of the UAE. And within Dubai, that's caused by the near collapse in tourism, the #StayHome campaign, which the government is promoting very strongly, travel only for essential purposes. And in fact, we're currently in a national curfew between 8 o'clock in the evening and 6 o'clock in the morning, where people are not allowed to go out unless they have a permit, which you can basically apply for on your mobile phone. But those permits are generally not being issued unless you are pretty much an essential worker or we have an essential trip to make. That's resulted in, we think, the data is not yet publicly available, we think from the transport planners in my company who've done these calculations, around 85% fall in traffic flows, depending on the route and the location, and estimated around 70 to 80% fall in patronage on the metro, buses, and indeed on taxis and ride-hailing services. Where those services are still operating, and the metro does operate in reduced hours, for example, buses as well, there are limitations on the occupancy of the trains or the buses to provide social distancing. So people are basically being held at the metro entrances and not allowed onto trains if they're too crowded. Frontline staff have been equipped with masks, gloves, and sanitizers on a day-to-day basis. And there's certainly been an increase in cleaning and sanitization of public areas. And in fact, over the last week, the government has been involved in a deep cleaning and sanitization effort of all roads and public transport across the area in the curfew hours, which I talked about already. At the same time, we're seeing an easing of regulations and the use of some vehicles for example, to deliver food and essentials. So ride-hailing and taxis are now allowed to deliver food and essentials. And we've also seen a number of concessions, free parking in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, reductions in toll roads into Abu Dhabi as well. So there are some easing of restrictions and fees going on, but of course that doesn't do much to combat the effects of the pandemic itself. And finally, there are a series of new regulations and penalties which the government have issued to really ensure that social distancing actually works and is complied with. So a whole load of penalties, fines, regulations came out last week. There are some ambiguities in those. For example, a lot of these talk about essential trips being allowed or having some being able to carry on, but there is no definition of what an essential trip actually is. So there's various interpretation of that. Presumably that will be resolved as we move forward, but literally these things are evolving on a day-to-day basis, and inevitably there's going to be some teething problems as they bed down. Next slide. Just a bit more on the impacts and responses locally on the transport network. Dubai International Airport is the world's busiest airport, depending on the particular list or the criteria that you use, but it is virtually shut down at the moment. As I've said, Emirates have basically grounded all of their planes apart from Sky Cargo, and in fact air freight is really the only thing which is moving in and out at the moment, and similarly for Abu Dhabi as well, which is the other major airport in the country. Construction projects are continuing, and we already heard some discussion around that, around road maintenance in the US, for example. Road maintenance is carrying on, construction sites are still open and proceeding even during the current lockdown, and that includes Expo 2020, which is a major event later in the year, and Route 2020, which is an extension of the metro, the Dubai Metro, to actually connect into that site. But we've seen on that project and others, there are delays in the slowdowns because materials and components cannot come into the country because of the factory shutdowns in China earlier in the year. The effect of the curfew on night shift working, lower productivity due to overseas foreign workers coming back into the UAE but needing to self-isolate for 14 days. Impacts on labour buses going to construction sites because of the social distancing guidelines, and a number of specialist tasks, particularly around things like metro construction or ITS or some of the more specialist aspects of delivery, because those experts or those specialists come from overseas, particularly from places like Spain, Italy and China. They simply haven't been coming, and therefore that's having an impact on those projects.
Jonathan?
Jonathan,
2 minutes left, I would say. Thank you.
Public agencies, I cannot talk directly for the RTA and others, but they are implementing office closures and working from home with various degrees of success. And finally, there's been no decision on the future of Expo 2020 at this point, but certainly a delay of up to a year is under discussion. Just moving on to the effects on our company, Atkins is a global design, engineering and project management consultancy. We have 50,000 people as part of the wider SNC labeling group around the world. We have about 2,500 people in the Middle East and about 1,300 people here in the UAE. And it's fair to say that, like everyone else, we didn't see COVID-19 coming in terms of the speed, the global reach and the severities of its impact. And a few days ago, we withdrew our 2020 full market outlook, which was published only at the end of February. We've withdrawn it from the markets because of the uncertainty and impact of COVID-19. And we know that basically most of our competitors in the region are going through similar impacts. Just to move on to the next slide, in terms of what those effects are, we've seen effects in terms of our operations and our facilities, direct productivity impacts of staff sickness, self-isolating, work, unable to work from offices, offices themselves being shut down and site operations being suspended. We rely heavily on international travel by air within the region, and that's been pretty much closed off to us in the short term. Domestic travel is also highly restricted. Pretty much all of our workforce are now working from home, some more easily than others, and that presents issues of line management, productivity, and indeed mental health and well-being, particularly given some of our junior staff live alone and are finding it potentially quite difficult with the lockdown and being unable to go out. So actually we're focusing very much on people's mental well-being as well as their physical well-being. On contractual and regulations, we are seeking to comply with all contractual obligations that we have with our clients and indeed government regulations. And we are finding, fortunately, though, that generally our clients are being flexible and reasonable because they themselves, of course, are under the same pressures and constraints that we are under. So we've seen a number of relaxations, for example, the withdrawal of tender bonds in terms of contract tenders within the region being announced. And finally, on sales and financial impacts, of course, we are quite concerned in terms of our business moving forward and are looking to see how costs can be controlled and how we can respond to that. Moving on to the next slide, and this is really the last slide I'd like to focus on in terms of the main message this afternoon. We are responding to the crisis in a number of ways.
Hello, Thierry. Hello, this is Edward from Israel. How are you doing?
Can you please cut your microphone? You're not supposed to speak. Thank you very much.
Hello.
In terms of, and these are the same impacts from the last slide in terms of operations and facilities. We have implemented working from home. We are strengthening our information technology, laptops, access to equipment, VPN, and so on to facilitate that. We have been fine-tuning some of our communications platforms, for example, replacing Skype with Microsoft Teams or the use of Zoom for virtual meetings and communications. And we are getting prepared for precautions around office working when the situation allows, for example, deep cleaning, sanitization, and so on. Travel and mobility, well, basically we are not traveling anywhere near as we used to, and that's through necessity of the current situation, but we're investing very much in remote working. On the workforce, we are implementing very much kind of team working, daily updates to our staff via a range of different means. And as I've said, a very strong emphasis not only on physical well-being during this crisis, but people's mental health as well, and making sure that people are very positive, focused, getting on with their jobs during this difficult time, and including replicating virtual teams, socializing online as much as we can. Contractually, we are honouring our obligations, but seeking some flexibility where it's practical to do so, and clients are helping and being reasonable with us on that. And we are, you will not be surprised to know, we're forecasting the business plan and the budget for our business for the rest of the year moving forward, and having a number of things in place to respond. Just to really conclude then, I focused on really the here and now. And right now, our company, like everyone else, is focused very much on dealing with the crisis as we see it. But we're also looking at various scenarios looking forward. How will this pandemic end? What is the shape of the recovery? How fast? Where does it happen first? We need to manage that We need to reflect that uncertainty, but be ready to respond to a number of different scenarios. And as I said, I come from a transport planning background, so forecasting the future is what we do for a living. And we are now starting to see, well, what will the post-COVID-19 world look like in terms of the transport network, supply and demand? Will people come back to travel in the same way that they did before, in the same level that they did before? What's going to be different? And we think that things like the overall demand for travel, behavioural change, an increase in office and home working as a permanent change in the market, more focus on sustainable transport and supply chain management. These are going to be a number of opportunity areas moving forward, and things that we are starting to think about. This final slide is really just, I won't dwell on this in the interest of time, but it's just making the point that there are a number of immediate challenges and indeed medium-term challenges that we will need to address, but there are opportunities as well. And it's really going to be a question of addressing the challenges, responding to them, but actually understanding and realizing some of the opportunities that will be presented at the appropriate time. Final slide. And this is just really a thought for the day. A quote from Dale Carnegie, a famous author: "When fate hands you a lemon, make lemonade." So basically, when we are faced with a challenging situation like this, yes, deal with the challenges and the difficulties, but also understand and try and realize some of the opportunities that may ultimately arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was very interesting. In the interest of time, also a reminder to all our participants, please feel free to ask questions in the chat channel and keep your microphones and cameras shut. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Valentina Galasso from Italy, who is the chair of our PIARC Committee on Road Network Operations and ITS. Valentina, your turn. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Patrick, sorry, I think you went too fast and you just slipped to the... Yes, thank you so much. Well, good morning, and thanks for joining us today for this webinar. The aim of my presentation today is to give you some pills about road network operations and intelligent transportation systems. We had a lot of questions last conferences, and we really thought that this could be useful to all PIARC audience. We have also the aim to explain to you why in this time of crisis, ITS can be of great help, not only for road authorities and road operators, but also for external stakeholders in the transport sector, for example, citizens or government. So the first thing that we are going to do is start from the definition, because when we are talking about RNO and ITS, we need to speak the same language. So what do we mean when when we are saying these two tiny words? First of all, I want to say that for PIARC TC 2.4, we decided to choose among several definitions because there are really a lot of them. And we want for road network operation to underline the strategic approach and its goal for optimizing efficiency and effectiveness, taking also in very well consideration the safety of road users and also their need of mobility. Why this is so strategic? Because it involves many stakeholders, and when an organization has this put in place, they can make really a difference in transport, and they can make an impact that matters for transport sector. For what concerns intelligent transportation systems, we want to underline that they are not only tool for better providing road users with mobility services, but we need to be careful because we are not talking only about ICT systems. We are also talking about procedures, people, and data. We will see a lot about that in a few minutes. You can easily realize how this can be complex and how this system can have a great benefic effect in be put in place in a road company and for a road authorities. Now, let's move on to the next slide in order to explain what is the role of ITS in a situation like the one we are facing now. Because we have already said ITS are solutions to provide road users with mobility service, but we can also say that speaking of mobility of people and goods, in this situation, this can be translated with emergency teams and vehicles that need to be guaranteed with availability of the road network, and also with the possibility to increase and better manage the delivery of goods, which is very, very important. Mobility needs also to be coordinated within road authorities and with other entities like government or other institutions in order to better manage the crisis situation. Not to mention also that the communication and information exchange with road users is fundamental in order to guarantee that your network is available when you most need it. Last point, but maybe the most important one. How can you, as a road authority, can be supported and preserve your decision if there is no tool that can help you in difficult time? When the reliability of information is vital, like in this case, to take that decision and to analyze different scenarios is a key for the organization. Just to be clear, I'm not talking only about traffic management, because when you speak about ITS, there are a lot of people that always say ITS is about traffic, but it's not like that, because I'm also talking about all road network management that includes people, patrolling teams, resources, vehicles. They need to move along the network. Now, if you go to the next slides, I will try to summarize some findings, some important takeouts that we can use from PIARC reports that we built up during the last cycle. First of all, I will be talking about the basics. Basic information on how ITS solutions can be of great help. So let's, for example, think about establishing the basic procedures that you need for monitoring and controlling your road network, whether you are in the middle of the crisis or not. These reports contain information regarding how to deal with stakeholders and road users' expectation in ordinary times and in extraordinary times as well. Now, I know that maybe most of you would think, but what about the case I cannot manage now to have a full implementation, a complex project starting with ITS from scratches? So what can we do? Go to the next slide, and let's say that we could use, for example, the low-cost ITS approach. This is very important and to be in this presentation, because low-cost ITS approach explain how ITS can be also delivered with low budgets and low scarcity of resources. So why, for example, in this kind of situation, a low-cost solution can be the answer? Because with very few money and scarce resources, an ITS solution can be used as well and can be developed in a time when you most need it, like, for example, the time you need to communicate with your road user. And it's also a very good occasion to develop and test the whole concept of efficiency and effectiveness of ITS system, taking also advantage of the resiliency of this solution and the flexibility that this kind of solutions can offer. Low-cost ITS solution now can allow, for example, communication with road user, as I said before, and also with other stakeholders in a very, very easy way. You can see we've been talking a lot about data. So what's their value in this situation? Let's go to the next slide so we can have some insight about it in these reports from last cycle of PIARC. This report deals with the concept of big data solution for ITS, but it does not explain only the ICT side of it. Principally, it is useful to arise awareness in your organization about the value of data for road operators. And what better use of data can we have if not enhancing the process of decision making, for example? And I'm sure all road operators and government and road authorities now, they are quite busy taking decision about the coronavirus situation. So let's say for concluding, sorry, Patrick, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So what can we say for concluding? First of all, I want to give you and leave you with a positive message. So in time of crisis, it's not all about the reaction to the crisis. I know that it's very easy to say that when I'm facing a laptop, but if you think about it, a good amount of time should be also dedicated to improvement and to capitalize this experience for the future of your organization. Because a crisis is a perfect situation to gain resilience. Resilience for the organization, for the people that work within the organization, and also for the system, ITS system and road network operation system. Do not also forget that share expertise in the transport sector, it's very useful because they are all experts now. They are saying that we need to share this expertise to not reinvent the wheel. Take this occasion also to get better and a better understanding of your strategy, of the situation that's around, and how this situation can be translated in your future strategies in order to improve them and to gain the ability to adapt to changes. Because all experts now are saying, Jonathan just said before, that we're gonna face changes in environment, in scenario, in background for transportation workers. So we need also to be ready to adapt to this change. Well, that's the end of my presentation. I hope we got some time more for exchanging the question and answer session. And thanks a million.
Thank you so much, Valentina. That was quick, but extremely interesting. So really thank you. And we will have time for some questions near the end. Our next speaker is Dr. Wang from China. Dr. Wang would like to invite you to make your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. So can you hear me?
Yes, very well. Very well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, it's an honor to be here to have this opportunity to share some works during the COVID-19 pandemic prevention and control work in the field of road transport in China. Because my English is limited, so if there's some misunderstanding, I hope you will forgive me. So please next slide. Please, yeah. Okay, I want to introduce three aspects of, first of all, is a general situation of the pandemic prevention and control in China. And the second one, I would like to share some main measures in the field of road transportation. Finally, I will introduce several cases of our technology applications in this period. So the pandemic in China started in middle to late January with a concentrated outbreak in Hubei province, especially Wuhan city. So after more than 2 months of active prevention and control, the good results have been achieved. In total, the cumulative number of confirmed cases so far is more than 80,000, more than most of the cases has been cured, and the remaining cases is about 2,000. So next slide. There are two major load events in this period. The one is that on January 20, the National Health Commission of China issued the #1 announcement officially listing COVID-19 as Class B infectious disease management. And the second one is on February 8, the State Council of China issued a circular requiring all regions to carry out pandemic prevention and control and resume work at the same time. So next slide. So combined with the two low times, the prevention and control of the pandemic in China can be roughly divided into 3 stages. The first stage are named local prevention and control stage before January 20. The typical feature of this stage is that the prevention and control of the pandemic, mainly in Hubei province, especially in Wuhan city. And the second stage are named national prevention and control stage from January 20 to February 8. The typical feature of this stage is the whole national pandemic prevention and control. This time the shops are closed, people work at home and the tactic. And the third stage are named the comprehensive stage after February 8. In this stage, one hand for pandemic prevention and the other hand for the resumption of work in this stage. So next, here I share some main measures the MOT issued about. The first one is issued some protection guidelines, and the second and third is main focus on the measures in support for emergency supplies and the return trip guarantee for migrant workers. And the fourth is a motivator-free policy. So they issued 3 protection guidelines during this period. One is technical guidelines for disinfection of public transport issued by the State Council. The other 2 are guidelines for health protection at passenger terminals and transport vehicles, and the guidelines for prevention and control of COVID-19 outbreaks in passenger terminals and transport vehicles with region and grade classification. The 2 are all issued by MOT. Next slide. These 3 guidelines mainly for all kinds of transport, including railway, civil aviation, road passenger transportation, taxi tactic, and in the prevention and control of terminal and transportation operations, such as disinfection, ventilation, and traffic organize, and meet the requirement of the personal protections, including temperature measurement, wearing mask tactic. In the latest guidelines, according to different risk area, such as high risk, medium risk, and low risk area, we will do the different classification rates requirements. Next slide. Take the road passenger transport as an example. It issues that it is requirement of no more than 50% of the rated passenger load, and guide passengers to keep a certain distance from each other. And we set real 2 rows as one-way isolation area on the bus. And along the bus route, we set the observation stations. In case of passenger favor, we will arrange the seat on the isolation area on the bus and deliver them to the station immediately, effectively prevent cross-infection. And we need connect passenger information and forward to the health department through online ticket seller system. Let passengers scanning QR code to do some online fillings. So this issues ensure the passengers safe and no infection while the transportation. Okay, next. The second main measures is about transportation support for emergency supplies. So in the process of pandemic prevention and control, especially in early stage, the rapidly rising number of infections and prevention materials shortages in many areas, such as masks, protective clothing, drugs, tactic. So to solve this problem, the Transportation Department issued some measures. Its main principle is named 3 no and 1 priority. So for this pandemic prevention material transporting vehicles, ZVO, no inspection, no stop, no charge in places like security checkpoints or toll gates along the way. At the same time, for these vehicles, we adopt the vehicle pass management. For the pass handling, we simplify the procedures. We provide uniform pass styles through the government website or WeChat or email and other convenience ways, so that carrier units or drivers can print and fill it in locally. And during the pandemic prevention control period, no less than 14 days of home or designed isolation measures should be taken for all people arriving from different regions. However, in principle, it is not necessary to adopt the measures of 14 days of isolation for drivers and other people who do a shortened delivery of supplies to the pandemic area. So this measure has greatly improved the emergency material support work and provided an important guarantee for the prevention and control of the pandemic. Okay, next one. And the third major measures is about the return trip guarantee for migrant workers. The outbreak of disease in China have a correctly is just during the Chinese traditional Spring Festival holiday. So large quantities of migrant workers returns to his hometown before Spring Festival, and these migrant workers need to be back to work in the comprehensive stage. So in order to ensure the rapid return to work, also in order to ensure the pandemic prevention and control in the process of transportation, Transport Department issued a special charter transportation policy for these rework people. Implementation like specially assigned person, special vehicle, special factory, and a special line. And get the point-to-point and one-stop transportation. So to ensure speed and safety, charter transport vehicles are used the chartered vehicle permit management as the pandemic prevention material transport vehicles. We greatly simplified permit processing procedures. Also give these vehicles road pass priorities. So through this measure, they effectively ensure the resumption of work and production. Okay, the next one. The fourth measure is about the motorway toll-free policy. It is allowed toll-free for small passenger cars since January 23. Then since January 25, it's allowed toll-free for vehicles transportation emergency supplies or medicals or patients for pandemic prevention, and these cars with these vehicles with convenient pass priority. And since February 7, it's allowed toll-free for chartered vehicles transporting migrant workers organized by the local government to return to their works. And the latest is since February 17 to the end of the pandemic prevention and control work, allow toll-free for all vehicles on the toll road. Yeah, next one. So and finally, I would like to share some examples of the technology applications in China during the pandemic prevention and control. The first one is about the application of personal health code. It is appeared in the third stage, and in order to effectively health monitor of the personal travel between different cities. So to scanning WeChat QR code and enter the personal identity information and the other information such as temperature measurement results, tactic, and whether effective isolation for 40 days, or whether from higher risk areas, or whether close contact with infected persons is tactic. Then we are giving everyone a colored health code. You can travel between different cities by this code. The green code can normal city travel, and yellow code represent a risk. So you need 7 days to normal home quarantine, and red code on behalf of the people at high risk require 14 days of home quarantine to become normal. The use of the digital pass or personal health code provide a new technical for the health monitoring of cross-region movements of people, which effectively reduce the cross-region spread of the virus. Okay, next one. The second application is the digital travel card. It is with the aid of mobile communication operators such as China Mobile, China Unicom, and China Telecom's mobile date, and monitoring the past 14 days trip information. You just enter a phone number, and it can show the cities you have passed during the past 14 days. And based big data, it analyzes whether you have passed high risk cities or regions. If all goes well, it will give you the green travel card and ensure you travel. Okay, next one. The third application is infrared temperature measuring equipment, mainly used in passenger stations, expressway service area, and other areas to personal temperature detection and realize non-contact and temperature measurements. Okay. And the fourth application is application of bus travel code. This code is before you get on the bus, you need to scan the WeChat QR code. It can effectively record travel information, including information about travel times to ride the bus, so that in the event of a trip on a bus appeared infection, it can quickly and efficiently to trace and find close contacts to do the isolation control and prevention. Next one is about the base face recognition and temperature measurement in bus. This device on bus can quickly locate the forehead through face recognition and quickly detect the temperature of passengers through in-field to ensure the safety of passengers. Okay, about some of my sharing. Due to time and English level, I hope I can help you. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Jian, Dr. Wang. It was a detailed and very interesting presentation. And thank you again to our 4 speakers. I'd like to move on to our questions and answer session. We are supposed to end in about 12 minutes, but maybe we can overrun this by up to 10 minutes. So Christos, I saw that there were some questions raised in the chat channel. So is there any question you would like to ask, and to whom? Thank you. Yes, to you, Christos.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to all of our panelists, for the excellent material that they shared with us today. The first question I would ask first from Jim Tymon and then from Jian Wang, and the question is: Are you accelerating highway project delivery and highways maintenance works?
So, Christos, thank you for that question. It really does vary by state. As I mentioned, there are a couple of states that have actually stopped highway construction projects But there are several that are taking advantage of the fact that we're seeing record low traffic volumes, and that's giving them greater access to some of those facilities that they are doing construction or major maintenance projects on. So Texas, for example, a few weeks ago decided to take advantage of the fact that there are fewer cars and trucks on the road the last several weeks, and have accelerated some of the projects that they have on the books for them. But one of the things that they're trying to balance, obviously, is making sure that the construction and maintenance workers that are working on those projects are able to do so and still stay healthy and maintain and be safe and avoid contracting the virus. So they're trying to strike that right balance. The South Carolina Department of Transportation actually came up with an interesting document where they partnered with the private sector construction companies to come up with really guidance for how to continue work on a construction or maintenance project, but also still be mindful of social distancing and all of the hygiene requirements that will help us combat COVID-19. So it's really being handled differently on a state-by-state basis, but there are several states that are trying to take advantage of the fact that there are lower traffic volumes.
Thank you, Jim. And would we be able to share something like the guidance that South Carolina DOT has put together with our audience through PIARC?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Christos, let me see if that's a publicly available document. And we have some other resources too. As you know, we held a similar conference to this with the senior officials from state DOTs across the country about a week and a half ago, and we have a written summary of that. So that may be helpful for the audience as well. Let me see if I can get both of those documents.
Thank you, Jim. That would be great. Jian, the same question to you, knowing that in addition to your job as a researcher at the China Academy of Transportation Science, you are also a deputy director at a regional road authority. Is in China, are you accelerating construction of highway projects and maintenance of roadworks right now, or did you have to close the projects down?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you said the road project in China, most of the projects are resumed, yes. Especially after March, because because of the economic development and investment is a important way to the economic development. The traffic on the road, especially no down, but it's not the in fact to resume the construction of a roads project. Yeah.
Thank you, Jian. The next one would be to Valentina and to Jonathan, knowing their expertise. What kind of specific ITS measures did you use to help on the fight against COVID-19? Valentina?
Well, let's say first, the evidences coming to the road operators or road agency can be shared within stakeholders, for example, with government or ministry, in order to assess the situation. I'm thinking about, for example, people moving in a very quick way from big city to small towns. Also based on traffic provision forecast, this can be assessed in time and can be of help for government to assess the situation. Second, the communication to road users, so who's going along the network. So communication through variable message signs is fundamental, and there are a lot of countries now, they are putting up messages about coronavirus situation on variable message signs. Or, for example, through basic ITS like apps or simple device that can help share basic information and instruction. When in time of crisis, people want to know what they need to do to move.
Thank you, Valentina. Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I think Valentina's made kind of, probably the main points. I mean, just a couple of things to add. I mean, I guess the ability to distinguish between kind of vehicle types and whether it's movement of passengers or movement of goods. So this issue of what is an essential trip on the network, and actually being able to monitor that and to regulate that. I mean, I think, the actual detailed kind of guidance on methodologies probably some way away, whether it will be this crisis or the next crisis, that we actually start to kind of develop expertise. But certainly the point that Valentina made, and we've already heard it with the presentation from China about the use of mobile phones, basically providing an ability to identify people and to track movements, whilst having a whole plethora of implications for kind of civil liberties and privacy. And we could debate this probably for the next kind of 6 months, but as an effective way of being able to track people's movements within and between cities, and to be able to actually effectively risk assess them in terms of where they've been and what they may or may not have been exposed to. That seems to me to have huge potential for a very practical way of managing things in a pandemic or a crisis situation. I mean, it seems to me that at the moment the big problem we have with these lockdowns is they are an incredibly blunt instrument, and they don't really distinguish between the level of risk that you may or may not have been exposed to in terms of having or transmitting or catching COVID-19. If we can develop methods where we can start to kind of break that down and actually be more fine-grained in the way that we manage the movement of people, then we may be able to actually start to get to a situation where lockdowns can be much more finely grained and managed between areas and between different groups or people within the population. As I say, it raises a whole load of other issues, but as a technical solution, it strikes me as having kind of huge potential moving forward.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jim, the next question, it's a follow-up really to the first one. And how do you prevent supply chain, like contractors, asphalt concrete producers, and others from stop working if, if the state DOTs are indeed working on construction projects?
Okay, so Christos, what we've found is that most of the contractors really have wanted to continue to work. A lot of them are smaller businesses that are worried that they won't be able to stay in business if they are forced to close for a prolonged period of time. So for the most part, everybody up and down the supply chain has wanted to continue work. We're seeing some states, Michigan, for example, there's a an association that represents the road builders in Michigan, and they've asked the governor there to halt construction. But again, I think that most of the construction companies are trying to push forward as much as possible with projects, even all the way up and down the supply chain. Obviously, there's going to be some instances where there isn't the case, but most of what we've heard is more of a desire to stay open and continue to work on these projects as opposed to the opposite.
Thank you, Jim. My next question that we have, it's actually to...
Christos, Patrick here. The session was scheduled to end at, well, just now, actually. So I think we have to thank our speakers. If they can stay for a little while longer, that would be really welcome, because we have quite a few questions lined up. For our audience, if you need to leave now, this is, of course, perfectly understandable. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer. As we said earlier, the session is recorded in video, and that video will be made available on PIARC's website, and so will the PowerPoint slides as a PDF file. So if you leave now, rest assured you're not going to lose vital information. Christos, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to everyone who's been here. So we'll continue with a question to Jian. Based on the different applications used, which ones have been the most relevant in the case in China, and the ones that you believe were the most successful? Jian, I believe this relates to the technology applications that you've shared with us. Patrick, I think Jian is still, okay, now he's not muted.
I tried to unmute him, but that didn't seem to have worked. So maybe move on to another question now.
Yep, let's move to another question while we are doing that. And the next question is to Jonathan. Jonathan, do contractors experience communication difficulties in getting safety managers across to workers coming from a variety of countries with different languages and cultures?
I think the answer to that is it's no more or less difficult than before, in terms of when we are basically supervising on site. We often work with kind of multicultural, multilingual kind of workers, so we're quite used to doing that. And in terms of the supervisors that we have, we kind of map onto the kind of the workers that we basically have on site. I mean, the big issue that we've had, I think, is in terms of some of our site operations effectively have had to cease, and that's come from two directions. Either that's come basically from the site owner and the actual kind of construction operation itself, or we have an ongoing construction operation and our own health and safety rules kind of kick in, and as I suppose many on this call will be aware, sometimes health and safety is which has to take priority in terms of protecting our own staff, and effectively, therefore, we've had to withdraw supervisory staff from those sites, with the result that those sites themselves either go slow or indeed have to shut down. So I think we get kind of hit from kind of two angles. The other issue that we've had, and I think I alluded to it in my own presentation, is because, and this is particularly the case in the Gulf, because most of the either the workforce or the professional staff are themselves expats, and they travel, they may travel in and out of Europe, they may travel in and out of India or South Asia. And of course, that happens as a matter of course. But when you have a situation like this, where the aviation system and borders are basically progressively shutting down, or we're progressively subject to 14-day quarantines, moving in and out of countries, then it slows the whole operation down to the point that it's very difficult to maintain the same level of service. So what will we do about that in the future? I'm not entirely sure, but I guess when the dust has settled, we will develop procedures and ways of managing this, or kind of predicting and managing some of this a bit better than we have to date, recognizing that this time we're doing it for the first time in incredibly short notice. But we'll learn and we'll improve next time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jim, the next question, it's to you, actually from one of our panelists as well, from Valentina. Can you please explain the mechanism by which different road authorities coordinate themselves for border activities, or just to have a comprehensive approach in the whole country?
So, that's a great question considering what we're going through now. I would say that in a normal environment, there are relatively few, if any, issues in coordination across state lines. Occasionally there are differences in how to handle some of the projects that will come across state lines, but I think that states in general do a very good job of working together at those places where a road or a bridge crosses a state border to make sure that they have a consistent approach. What we're seeing a little bit of now is, there are a handful of states, I think, that are concerned that if their state does not have a high occurrence of COVID-19, but a neighboring state does, that they are working to make sure that everybody that comes into the state that maybe doesn't have a high occurrence of COVID-19 are aware that they should self-quarantine for 2 weeks in order to prevent spreading the disease, the virus, in the event that they may have it but not show symptoms yet. So we're seeing that in certain states, and it's being done through, I guess, a couple of different methods. One is, as I mentioned, in Florida, they were setting up checkpoints, but also a lot of states are utilizing their variable message signs on the highways to get that kind of message across, encouraging folks to stay at home, encouraging folks as they come, if they're coming from an area that it has a high occurrence of COVID-19, to make sure that they're self-quarantining for 2 weeks. So, we're seeing uses of that technology with the variable message signs to spread the word as well.
And I can share a little bit of the experience here in Rhode Island, where if someone is traveling from another state in Rhode Island with the intent of staying in Rhode Island, we are actually, as a road authority, we are providing traffic control help to our state police and National Guard in order to screen these out-of-staters that they are coming into Rhode Island and asking them to self-quarantine for 14 days. So our role is limited to really providing, support to the state police.
But as Christos would I think support me in saying that this is very unusual. I mean, to essentially have travel between states limited or not be seamless is extremely unusual. I can't think of a time in recent memory where that's ever really happened. So this is hopefully just a short-term response to the crisis that we're dealing with, but it isn't something that we usually see here in the United States.
Correct. So the next question is, you know, from different Saverio from Italy. Since the COVID-19 provoked a relevant decrease in the use of private cars, with also relevant benefit for the environment. For example, we saw blue skies instead of gray in some of the cities and towns in China, and you know, in the United States and all over the world as well. How can we benefit from this lesson to face climate changes? So if we can unmute Jian, maybe we'll start with Jian on this one. Patrick?
Yeah, I would like to jump in. Indeed, Johnson told us that, well, when you need lemons, you make lemonade. I think people in the hospital now probably wouldn't want to hear that. And I think the priority of all sectors and public services now is to respond to the crisis. But it's true that every life counts. It's really important to have that in mind. But it's true that we are witnessing maybe that having lower traffic has an impact on air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. It's not a secret. It's mathematical almost, but now we're witnessing it. So I guess many people, road users, taxpayers, voters, could in the future, when they have other priorities, when they have more, when they're back to normal, more or less, ask the questions aloud and ask the questions to their decision makers and request that more consideration is given to pollution elements and maybe climate change elements. But I think I would say it's really too early to take a position on this. Thanks.
Yeah. And thank you, Patrick. This actually brings a good point, and I want to be very respectful of everybody's time and that we are running late. We do have some additional really good questions. So what we can do, it's actually forward these questions to our panelists and ask them to help us in providing, you know, maybe written responses as part of the documentation that we are going to provide at the end as a service to that PIARC provides. So with your permission, I would like to ask one last question to you and thank our panelists and presenters for the excellent material that they shared with us today. So in closing, if I can ask one last question to you, relative to what else is PIARC planning relative to providing more information and more resources on responses to COVID-19?
Well, thank you, Christos. Hope you can hear me. Well, you saw the disclaimer earlier, so maybe you want to take this with a pinch of salt, just like everything else, really. But we have at PIARC set up a web page on our website where we collate all information that we are aware of that is relevant for the COVID-19 crisis and road operators and road administrations. You're very welcome to visit that web page. We're also planning further webinars, including in French language and Spanish language. I think that the Spanish language webinar has been confirmed for next week, actually, on the 7th. We invite our experts from our network through the road director, usually what we call the first delegate of PIARC, and we invite them to nominate an expert to take part in those activities. But then all these webinars are recorded and the videos are shared publicly with everyone who cares. This is what we're doing so far, and but beyond that, we are about to announce a survey that will be continuing, on which people will be able to ask questions and raise issues that they are concerned with. We're not guaranteeing that those questions will be answered on the spot, but they will certainly be taken into account when we plan our next actions. That's one thing. Another thing we are planning is to set up a bulletin or briefing note or from PIARC where we text, in other words, a newsletter where we collate that information and provide text-based information on the current crisis. But if you have any other requests, I'm asking our colleagues in the audience, please let us know, because it's really important. We have set up a response team. The contact details are here on the screen. You are really welcome, all of you, to contact us here. And if you'd rather use a shorter email address, info@piarc.org. That's always open. The next English language webinar is likely to take place next week. I would say we haven't decided on the exact date yet. Well, these are the people in the response team, really. So this, I think, brings us to the conclusion of this session. If you agree, Christos, I would like again to thank all of our speakers for their time and the time they shared with us today, and also when they prepared their presentation. That's really welcome. I hear that there are lots of initiatives across the globe, such as TRB in the US, CEDA in Europe, and others. We're trying to reference those on our website so as not to duplicate what's being done elsewhere. So please stay tuned, check our webpage, and we'll be back probably next week, and certainly next week in English. Thank you. Christos, do you want to add something?
No, thank you to everyone. Stay tuned. And, you know, as we are trying to provide as much information as possible during this time of crisis.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Take care. And talk to you next time. Thank you so much.